Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Buenas noches. Good evening and welcome to your Smithsonian National Museum of American History. I'm Brent Glass, the director of the museum, and it's wonderful to greet you here this evening. It's going to be a wonderful performance, and I know you're all going to enjoy. I also want to welcome our friends from the Argentine Embassy who are here, and also since we're webcasting this event, I'd like to say hello to all our friends in Argentina who are here, and why don't you join me in welcoming our audience from Argentina. Tonight's program is co-sponsored with the Smithsonian's Latino Center, and tonight, of course, we're going to enjoy a wonderful performance by Latin Grammy Award winning musician and producer Pablo Aslan, who is here. And I'm excited about that. This program also serves as the kickoff event, the inaugural event of our 9th annual Jazz Appreciation Month program at the National Museum of American History. Jazz Appreciation Month, we call it JAM, has been going on for 9 years, and we've had some wonderful programs in the month of April for the past 9 years, and this is our kickoff event here at the beginning of April. We have at the Smithsonian, as all of you know, a world-class institution, a world-class collection, but we rely on a world-class staff to make all the programs here possible, and I'm very happy to recognize my colleague Eduardo Diaz, who's the director of the Smithsonian Latino Center, who is a great partner and who has made all these programs possible. This is the second in the programs recognizing the great culture and history of Argentina, and thank you, Eduardo, for doing your great work. I'd just like to mention 3 other people who at the Smithsonian make these programs possible. Joanne Stevens, for her leadership and direction in the Jazz Appreciation Month program. She's been wonderful. Magdalena Mieri, who is here and directs our museum's program in Latino history and culture, and she has been wonderful. And also John Hasse, senior curator for our music history program and the founder of the Jazz Appreciation Month program. Please join me in thanking these great Smithsonian employees. This museum, your National Museum of American History, is the largest and most popular history museum in the country. We were closed for 2 years, from 2006 to 2008, for renovations. And then when we reopened, since we reopened in November 2008, we have welcomed more than 5.5 million people to this museum. And they come here from all across the country and all over the world to explore American history and discover what it means to be an American. And I hope that you will come back with your friends and with your family to enjoy the museum, and especially to see some of our great exhibitions. The Star-Spangled Banner, the flag that inspired our national anthem, is here. Thomas Jefferson's writing table on which he wrote the Declaration of Independence is here. The lunch counter from Greensboro, North Carolina, where the student sit-in movement was launched during the civil rights period. Great, and the ruby slippers from the Wizard of Oz is here. So there's always great things for you to see and enjoy from all aspects of American history here at the Museum of American History. And of course, the story of America cannot be told without the story of American music. And in order to understand the American identity, in order to understand the American dream, you have to appreciate American music. Music connects us. Music provides a miraculous bond and helps us understand our diversity and the complexity of our culture and our history. Music is really the soundtrack of American history. And at the Museum of American History, we have a wonderful world-class music history collection. Instruments, musical scores, artifacts, even the sounds and stories of the past. And our work in this area really begins with the collections of instruments and artifacts and documents and recordings. We also have a strong tradition of outstanding exhibitions in this field. How many of you remember the wonderful exhibition Azucar, the life and story of Celia Cruz, which we had here several years ago? That was a path-breaking and just enormously popular exhibit that launched here and then traveled across the country to several cities and to thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who enjoyed that exhibition. Those are the kinds of exhibitions and kinds of programs that we want to continue to support here. And this is your Museum of American History. We continue to collect in this field, so if you know someone who has a wonderful collection that should be here at the Smithsonian, remember we're in the forever business here at the Smithsonian. So when we collect something, it is for the permanent value, shows the permanent value to the story of America. Now please join me in welcoming Eduardo Diaz, the director of the Smithsonian Latino Center.
Thank you, Brent. Muy buenas noches a todos. Muchas gracias por su presencia. Tengo entendido de que hay algunos argentinos aquí en la casa, ¿cierto? Sí, me imagino. Vamos a iniciar. Primeramente quiero agradecer a todo el personal aquí del museo, a la Embajada Argentina. También quiero saludar muy especialmente a los televidentes que también están presenciando este concierto ahí en Buenos Aires y en Argentina. Por webcasting, ¿no? Por la vía electrónica virtual. Así que, aunque no pueden estar aquí con nosotros, están con nosotros, ¿no? Virtualmente. I'm very pleased that we were able to webcast this program, and we've been doing a lot of work in Argentina to put the entire series of programs together. I hope that you've picked up a program by now. It's a very attractive blue, simple program. It gives you all that you need to know. Before I go any further, I know you all have these. I know that. So please go ahead now, before we have an embarrassing moment during this wonderful concert you're about to hear, and turn it off or put it in the stunned position or whatever silent position that you need to do. I want to start by recognizing a couple of folks. First, the Charge of Affairs, the Deputy Chief of Mission, Jose Luis Perez Gabilondo, and his wife. Thank you very much for being here, as well as Conrado Solari Rigoyen, the Cultural Attaché of the Embassy of Argentina, Roberto Salafia, who's a commercial officer that works at the Embassy as well. Roberto, thank you for being here, as well as Marisa Geller, who works in our cultural section. Thank you so much. Today's a day off in Argentina, but it's a day on today, I think, here in the United States, and we're very happy that you all are here from the Embassy. They have been wonderful, as has the Secretary of Culture. Queremos agradecer a la Secretaría de Cultura de la Nación por su colaboración, también la Embajada Norteamericana en Buenos Aires, también una entidad que está colaborando con este esfuerzo, y también la Secretaría de Turismo, en otras palabras, InproTour, que es la comisión o la agencia que promueve el turismo argentina. These are the Secretary of Culture and the Secretary of Tourism, through their agency InproTour, have been very important in supporting this program. They are our sponsors, as well as the Anheuser-Busch Foundation. We're very thankful to our sponsors. Can I hear a little round of applause for our sponsors, please? Thank you. I also want to thank Larry Applebaum, who's here from WPFW, who is a big fan of, yes, let's give it up for Larry. He's got a wonderful program called Sound of Surprise. It's on WPFW, which is 89.3 FM, Sunday afternoons from 4 to 6. And so if you want to hear like what's happening in the surprise, right? Name says it all. Want to hear the latest and some really, Larry's on top of it. Let's just put it that way. And of course, he's all over Pablo Aslan and Tango Jazz. So Larry has been very helpful to us in promoting this event, as WPFW has. Our friend Jim Byers, who actually follows Larry at 6 o'clock on WPFW and the Latin flavor. So we're very happy to have this kind of support at the local level. Well, this is a wonderful way to sort of kick off Argentina, the Smithsonian 2010, 26 events in Washington, D.C., New York, and in Buenos Aires. It's all there in the calendar. We encourage you to follow and come back and attend some of the other programs. Make this your first one, but please do not make it your last one. We hope to see you again. Por favor, hablen con sus amigos, sus parientes, a todo el mundo que participe en todos los programas que vamos a ofrecer dentro del marco de esta serie de programas Argentina en el Smithsonian en 2010. Por favor. Y ahora me da mucho gusto poder presentar a un gran músico, Pablo Aslan. Es una figura muy importante dentro del jazz latino, dentro del jazz, el tango jazz, argentino de nacimiento, ha vivido en Nueva York. I would say he's kind of like the person, the standard bearer for New Age tango and tango jazz in the United States. We're lucky that he's living in New York, and he also puts together these amazing groups, and this amazing quintet that you're going to see today, Tango Grill, is simply no exception. He just performed, according to my spies in New York, wonderful performance at Lincoln Center, jazz at Lincoln Center, and blew the place out, and I'm sure that he will do the same here. Pablo won a Grammy Award, a couple years back for this work, and it's not a mystery. He won it in 2007 for his album Te Amo Tango with the bandoneonista Raúl Jaurena. He's absolutely one of the best ambassadors that Argentina could possibly have for this wonderful legacy of tango. So, without further ado, let's give it up for Mr. Pablo Aslan and his quintet. Que se oiga.
We will solve that in 1 second. Watch. One. Hey. Details. Thank you, James. You need to plug it in. All right. I'm not going to sing, don't worry. And maybe we can put it on this side. Yeah.
1, 2, check in.
Well, I can do it without a mic, but I thought it'd be a little more elegant. Good evening. Thank you so much for having us here. This is a great opportunity for us to play in Washington, D.C., a city I particularly love a whole lot. And here at the museum with the Smithsonian, that I do go back. We've found the sound. Okay, now we need to turn it down a little bit. There we go. It's a great pleasure. By way of explanation, we want to say to Eduardo Diaz, thanks for leaving that bottle of rum backstage. I tell you. Anyway, it is a great pleasure to be here. We're going to have a lot of fun and bring you these sad tangos that we play. We just opened with something that Carlos Gardel used to sing called Viejo Smoking. And smoking is the smoking jacket, the tuxedo. And, tangos have these very particular lyrics, and in this case, he's singing to his old tuxedo about all the great times they had and all the women that cried on the coat and all the things that happened, but he's alone in his room singing to the tuxedo. And this next tune, as it is, and fortunately, we don't sing the lyrics, we just feel them, we know the lyrics, but we know what the tunes are about. This next one was written by another contemporary of Gardel and someone who became, as Gardel, he died in the 30s, and this gentleman continued to record. Yes? I know, we didn't sound check this, so it's really something that we're adding to the mixer. Anyway, the singer was Charlo. José Pérez de la Riestra was one of the great tango singers of the 1930s, and he wrote this song, and he dedicated it to rancor, to a grudge. It's called Rencor. And again, he's not talking about feeling that, he's talking to the rancor and to the grudge. Rencor, mi viejo rencor. Thank you. Thank you. Before we go too far, I want to introduce these wonderful musicians. Direct from Buenos Aires, one of the busy and very creative and prolific musicians right now in a very thriving Buenos Aires scene. On piano, Abel Rogantini. We're very fortunate tonight to have a special guest actually substituting for the maestro Raúl Jaurena and bringing his own very unique voice to this very bizarre instrument, the bandoneon, directly from Zurich, actually, the son of an Argentine musician and a wonderful jazz bandoneonist, Michael Sisman. One of Argentina's greatest jazz musicians of all times, really a pioneer and someone we've always looked up to, and it's just a great pleasure to be sharing the stage and be playing with him, an international known Argentine musician who lived in Europe for many, many years and now is based in Buenos Aires. We're very happy to have him now in New York and in Washington. Gustavo Bergalio, trumpet. And beyond his genetic and family makeup, this gentleman is really, for me as a bass player, just the ideal tango jazz drummer. But he's also just a great drummer all around and very busy in Buenos Aires and also leading his band Escalandrum. Very happy to have the great Daniel Piazzolla on drums. We're going to play a composition by Abel Rogantini. He called this Milonguinha. Thank you. Next is one of the most beautiful compositions in the tango repertoire by one of the most important composers, the great Mariano Mores. This is a tune that actually have lyrics by Enrique Santos Discépolo, the great writer. But in this case, we found a way to play this tune to evoke a lot of the feelings in the words, and there's a tribute also to the great Gustavo Bergali. This is called Sin Palabras. Gustavo Vergali on trumpet. Well, I have to tell you something that we're very excited about. On our way here, we ran into a bunch of dancers from Tango Argentino, and they're around in town. I guess they have a free date or something, and they told us they would come by. And we told them, we don't have enough of a stage, but we thought we would arrange something for them to at least dance. They're going to check their book and see if they were available. So I don't know that they've arrived yet, but so we're possibly up for a very special treat. So thank you. So in any case, we want to feature this wonderful bandoneonist and composer, Michael Sisman, who wrote something he called Close Encounter. I've been calling Close Encounters. This is a close encounter of the fourth kind. Daniel Piazzolla on drums. Michael Sisman, bandoneon and composition. Thank you. The dancers are not here yet, right? What? We'd love to have them. We have a tango queued up. But, before that, we want to say hola to all the people on the webcast, especialmente en la Argentina. Queremos mandar saludos a las familias que nos están viendo, quizás mi hermana María y mis viejos. En serio. The Pipi's family. I know, and they're seeing this blurry image. I think that's him. That's him. But it's one of those magic things that we're also in several places at once, and it's actually my dream that we'll get to that point where performing, we perform for you, but we perform for these other audiences around the world. It would be great. It would definitely help the music business to transcend what's going on right now, where everything we do has sort of been promoted to free. We hope that these audiences that join us through the webcast are also our future audiences. So, hola. All right, well, dijeron que iban a venir, que iban a chequear el calendario. ¿Qué día es hoy? What's the date today? All right. It's easier to play the bass than to pull an April Fool's Day, but no, they're not here. All right, so you all were on to it, right? I got to practice some more. All right. So April Fools, there's no dancers. We didn't run into them. Yeah, I'm a loud one. I tell you, it makes me more nervous than playing the bass. I was like playing, and once in a while I'm like, okay, how does this continue? What do I do? No, concentrate, so it's a very difficult thing to do. I admire comedians a lot. This next is a tango from the 1920s. Our beloved Argentina is celebrating this year its 200th anniversary of our first independent local government on 20. Yes. And as a tango scholar, amateur historian, I'm fascinated by this because I have studied a lot 1910. Which is, of course, when we celebrate the centenary, and it was a big deal. And Buenos Aires, particularly back then, was just an amazing city, mostly like now, very open to the world. Of course, we were rich as Argentines, as they used to say, and for a while at that time, I learned recently, we were considered perhaps the next great nation instead of the United States. It was like sort of a toss-up. I know. But Buenos Aires apparently was a fascinating city all the way up to the Great Depression until 1930, really. We also had our first military coup, and the history continues from there. But the 1920s also were a particularly great time. And around that time, there was a bandoneon player who a lot of people describe as a little bit of a compadrito, a hoodlum, who was also one of the first bandoneon players to really get his way around the instrument. And he wrote some of the great tangos that we still to this day play, and that form so much of the core of our repertoire and what our music is about. So by Eduardo Arolas, we will play El Marne. Thank you, thank you. El Marne by Eduardo Arolas. Well, I want to, before we move on to the next number, I want to thank everybody who has been involved in inviting us and having us here at the Smithsonian Latino Institute. Eduardo and Ranald and Magdalena and Joanne, everybody here who helped us with the production, James back there with the sound, and all of you for coming out to hear this show. It's really a great treat to be playing for you. We want to pay tribute to the great maestro who single-handedly brought tango into modernity. It's very amazing that an artist would understand tango enough and have his head around the world and in jazz. You know that he had, I'm speaking of course of Astor Piazzolla, he had, he had lived in New York, and he also spent a lot of time in Europe, and he studied in Europe, and if anything, that gave him a perspective, a breath of fresh air to music that was becoming too sort of wrapped up in itself, and also who had generationally lost a lot of the momentum in the 1950s, particularly in the late 40s. Well, the late 40s it was thriving, but by the 1950s, when Piazzolla really started making his mark, a lot of changes had gone on in our culture, and tango was starting to suffer from old age, as it were. And he, as a composer and also as a musician in general, his energy, his attitude towards the music, and the life that he breathed into the music, to this day for us is a great example as a musician, as a creative person, on how to handle our work and how obsessively to think about these things and to believe that your music is something that is worth really risking a lot of things in your life to pursue. We're going to pay tribute by playing one of his emblematic compositions. This is something that he called Verano Porteño. Abel Rogantini on piano. Mikhail Sisman, bandoneon. Gustavo Vergali on trumpet. Daniel Piazzolla on drums. Thank you. Once again, thank you so much for being here and making this such a special evening for us. You realize we're having a lot of fun. What a job we have. We're going to close with a tune. Speaking of job, we just released a recording. This is my job as an announcer, and all musicians have turned into peddlers. The music industry, please sign me up and sell my record for me. I tell you, I went to Buenos Aires last year and worked with some of the musicians that I'm accustomed to working with in my last couple of albums. I also recorded with some of the great tango musicians, and I just basically invited everybody to a recording studio on a particular date, and we spent 3 days in there recording tangos, pretty much like this, with this kind of spontaneity and energy, and the mixture of the different musicians and their repertoire. A lot of the stuff you heard tonight is on that recording. We call it Tango Grill. Like I said, I would like to sell it to you. I know. I know. They didn't teach me this at music school, so we make it up as we go along. But I did learn something. I would like to sell it to you at $10 today. So that's a good one. That's a good one. All right, so we'll see you after the show for that, and thank you so much. This is a composition actually from my next to the last album, from something called Avantango, and it's a composition I dedicated to the great soccer player Norberto Beto Alonso. We're really not going to talk about soccer, but we do have our fingers crossed, don't we, for the World Cup. Vamos, vamos, vamos. Beto, muchas gracias.
Pablo Aslan. Quintet. Tango Grill. Que se oiga. Thank you very much for coming out this evening. CDs are for sale in the back, so please, if you like what you heard, want to shout out again a warm welcome to all of the folks in Argentina, all of you who are celebrating 200 years, the bicentennial of Argentina. We want to also thank the Cancillería in Argentina, also the Comisión Bicentenario for all of their support. Les damos las gracias a ustedes por haber venido y a todos los televidentes o los webidentes, o no sé cómo se dice eso en español, por su asistencia. Gracias, nos vemos en la próxima. Hasta luego. Buenas noches.